If you spend enough time in the windowless basements of municipal archives, especially in cities that were established before the mid-9th century, you will eventually notice a pattern that the modern architectural record has quietly erased. It appears again and again in the blueprints of brownstones, townhouses, and limestone manors constructed between 1750 and 1870. Near the geometric center of these homes, often at the exact point where the primary load-bearing walls converge, there is a small windowless room. On some plans, it is labeled a still room. On others, it is left blank, an intentional void carved into the geometry of the house. By the turn of the 20th century, these spaces had almost completely vanished from the physical world. They were filled with brick, converted into narrow utility closets, or absorbed into the growing networks of indoor plumbing and electrical wiring. What disappeared was something builders once considered essential. This was the spirit room. To understand why nearly every home once required a dedicated space for silence, we have to look at the world before the great age of standardization. The acoustic environment of the 19th century was not a chaotic field of noise. It was a localized, organic resonance. Every community on Earth was anchored to a specific frequency, usually produced by its largest resonator, a church organ or a massive bronze bell. These frequencies were never arbitrary. They were matched to the stone from the local quarry, the humidity of the region, and the geological foundation beneath the town itself. A village in the Swiss Alps vibrated at a different frequency than a port city on the Mediterranean. Every place had its own voice. The bells in your village rang at a pitch specific to your village, and the architecture of your home was designed to be the final, most intimate extension of that acoustic ecosystem. Just as Gothic cathedrals were engineered as monumental instruments, with reverberation times designed to amplify specific tones, the private residence functioned as a smaller, personal resonator. The spirit room was the tuning fork of the house. It was a space designed for resonance, constructed from the same crystalline limestone and carefully mixed mortar that medieval builders used to conduct sound waves. It was not a place for ghosts, despite what later Victorian spiritualists claimed. It was a place where the house could breathe in unison with the bells and organs of the community. We have physical proof of how sophisticated this understanding of sound actually was. In 2016, researchers at Greek universities used sine wave sweeps to map the acoustic properties of ancient churches. They discovered that architects had embedded clay pots, called echia, into the walls and domes in order to amplify specific resonant frequencies. These were not decorative features. They were acoustic devices. This technology was not limited to cathedrals. The spirit room in a 19th century home operated on a similar principle. It functioned as a hollow resonator, often containing nothing but the structural pillars that anchored the house to the earth. When the village bell rang, the house did not merely sit in the path of the sound. It participated in it. The stone amplified the bronze. The bronze amplified the human voice, and the spirit room acted as the central amplifier for the family dwelling. For centuries, the entire acoustic environment of a community vibrated at frequencies that belonged to that place and nowhere else. Then the year 1870 arrived. It was a decade of resets, both physical and legal. Records from the London Royal Philharmonic show that the tuning standard swung wildly during this period, shifting from 433 to 455 Hz. Across Europe, acoustic references were being forcibly redefined. In 1859, the French government passed the first law in human history dictating the pitch of music by legal statute, the diapason normal. For the first time, governments decided that the vibration rate of sound required regulation. What followed was the systematic destruction of the old resonators. Between revolutions, wars, and government decrees, at least 425,000 documented church bells were physically eliminated from the European landscape. Each of these bells had been a precision instrument, an acoustic reference point for its community. When they were melted down for cannons and industrial materials, the old frequencies died with them. The replacement bells were tuned to the new national standards, such as the 440 Hz reference tone that the United States Bureau of Standards began transmitting in 1936. The death of the spirit room occurred at exactly the same time as this acoustic purge. An instrument is only as functional as the frequency that feeds it. Without the original local resonance of the bronze bells, the spirit rooms inside private homes began to produce what researchers describe as muddy or flat frequencies. The very spaces designed to harmonize the family with the earth began to feel oppressive, dark, and wrong. The solution offered by emerging industrial governments was not to restore the bells, but to sanitize the home. Under the banner of the hygiene movement and new building codes introduced in the late 1800s, homeowners were encouraged, and eventually forced, to eliminate these unproductive spaces. The spirit room was replaced by the utility room. Crystalline limestone was covered with drywall. Resonant wooden floors were muffled beneath heavy carpets. Modern acoustic researchers note that materials such as drywall and foam panels are acoustically dead, too dead for singing, yet too live for clear speech. We have moved from houses that were generators of resonance into houses that are merely containers for amplified noise. Instead of a room that naturally amplified the frequencies of the local landscape, we now live inside networks of copper wires and radio towers broadcasting a single global standard. The local frequency disappeared. A national one replaced it. Consider the metallurgy of the bells that were destroyed. These were not simple pieces of metal. They were the product of hereditary knowledge passed down through generations of foundry families. The voice of a bell depended on the exact ratio of copper to tin, the cooling time, and the subterranean conditions of the casting pit. When the Soviet government ordered the melting of 1 million bells in 1929, they did not simply destroy bronze. They destroyed the physical record of the Earth's local vibration. Decades later, when foundries attempted to reopen, they discovered that the knowledge was gone. They could cast bells that looked identical to the originals, but they could no longer tune them to the stone of the cathedrals or the foundations of the towns they once served. If you stand inside a house built in 1840, you will often notice that the walls are twice as thick as those in a modern home. This was not merely for insulation. It was for mass. Mass is required to hold a low-frequency standing wave. The spirit room acted as the empty belly of the architecture, allowing these frequencies to circulate through the structure. When the room was removed, the house did not just lose space. It lost its ability to ground the people living inside it. This shift coincided with the sudden appearance of what doctors in the late 19th century called nervous exhaustion, a medical epidemic that spread across industrial societies in the 1880s, the exact moment these rooms were being phased out. People were living inside houses that had become acoustically starved. We are taught that the building codes of the 1870s were a triumph of safety. We are told that the great fires of Chicago, London, and Boston required the removal of hollow spaces to prevent flames from spreading. But examine what replaced those spaces. The spirit room was replaced by the mechanical room. Limestone was replaced with gypsum and paper. The natural resonance of the earth was replaced by the 60-cycle hum of electricity. We did not simply change architecture. We changed the biological environment of human life. In 2016, a study exposed 33 volunteers to music tuned to both 432 and 440 Hz. Participants listening to 432 Hz showed measurable decreases in heart rate and reported feeling calmer and more focused. If such a small shift in a recorded track can influence the body, imagine the physiological effect of living 24 hours a day inside buildings vibrating at frequencies chosen by committees in London or Vienna. The spirit room was once the only place in the house where a person could escape that artificial overlay and return to the ground tone of their specific patch of earth. One acoustics researcher studying Orthodox architecture made an observation that should stop us cold. He wondered whether builders considered the reverberant sound to be the true occupant for whom these spaces were constructed. If that is true, what happens when the sound disappears? We are left with buildings that are standing but empty. The architecture remains, the stone, the proportions, the geometry, but nothing feeds the instrument. The spirit room was the heart of a system in which stone, bronze, and human voice formed a unified resonance. A feedback loop matched to architecture down to the molecular properties of limestone. Modern architecture calls this progress. Standardization allowed the mass production of instruments and the global broadcast of information. But we rarely ask what that standardization did to the human body. We are the first generations in history to live in a world that is acoustically dead. We have microphones to compensate. We have noise-canceling headphones to block the industrial hum. But the resonance is gone. The buildings designed to hold the old sounds still stand, but nothing feeds them anymore. The stone remembers what the modern world chose to forget. If you walk into the center of an old house today, you may find a closet that makes no sense. Too small for coats, too deep for shelves. Knock on the back wall and it often sounds hollow. This is where they buried the spirit room. We were told it was done for safety. We were told it was done for efficiency. But the historical record suggests something else. The goal was uniformity. One pitch for every instrument, every orchestra, every recording, and eventually every home. 1,000 local voices were replaced with a single global broadcast. And with that change, we lost the place where we could remember the difference. The real question is not which frequency is correct. The real question is what happened when the building, the bell, and the human voice were all tuned to the same pitch. What occurred inside that resonance that we no longer experience? We have evidence that these spaces were engineered for sound with a sophistication we are only beginning to understand. What we no longer possess is the frequency that melted with the bronze. The spirit room was not replaced by a closet. It was replaced by a standardized silence that we have been taught to call normal. But that silence is not normal. It is a vacuum. We now live inside boxes that were once instruments, wondering why we feel disconnected from the spaces we call home. We are surrounded by stone that still waits to resonate, walls that have not heard the proper tone in more than a century. It is like living inside a silent orchestra. The instruments remain on the stage, but the musicians have forgotten how to play. The spirit room stands as a silent witness to a resonance we no longer know how to feed. When the 1890 census records were lost in a fire, we lost the names of millions. When the bells were melted, we lost the sound of the world. And when the spirit room was bricked over, we lost our connection to the earth beneath our feet. This transformation became the largest acoustic experiment in human history, carried out slowly across 3 centuries without our consent. We traded the unique resonance of our local landscape for a global broadcast. We traded stone instruments for drywall boxes. The spirit room is gone, but the architecture still waits for a sound that no longer exists. If the hygiene movement truly sought public health, why did the health of the population decline precisely as the resonance rooms disappeared? Why did the modern house become a place of stress rather than recovery? The answer may lie in the frequencies themselves. A house without a spirit room is a house without a ground. It is an ungrounded circuit. We are the current, and we have nowhere to discharge. Stone, especially the crystalline limestone used in cathedrals and manor houses, contains structures capable of producing a piezoelectric effect under pressure. If the spirit room focused the resonance of bells onto those crystalline walls, these houses may have functioned as more than shelter. They may have been power plants for the human nervous system, charging stations built into everyday architecture. When the bells stopped ringing at their local frequencies, the system stopped working. This is the history that the resets of the 19th century attempted to bury. Cities were rebuilt, but something deeper changed. We moved from a world of active resonance into one of passive consumption. We no longer generate our own sound. We listen to theirs. The spirit room was the final defense against that transformation, and its removal marked the completion of the shift toward a standardized global population. In the rare houses where the old still rooms survive, they are perfectly silent, yet strangely charged. They are the voids that allow the rest of the house to function. Without that empty center, the geometry of the building collapses into nothing more than a collection of rooms. The spirit room gave the house a center of gravity. It gave the family a point of convergence. Without it, we are simply occupants of a container. The buildings are still waiting. The crystalline limestone is still capable of producing its charge. The instrument remains intact. It simply has not been played in more than 150 years. The founders who understood the old frequencies are gone. Their knowledge melted into cannons and coins. But the stone remembers the promise that once tied people to the land where they lived. Until that resonance returns, we will continue to feel like strangers in our own homes, living in the silence of a world that was once meant to sing. We have more information than any generation in history. The internet sits in our pockets. Yet we have less resonance. We have more noise but less sound. The spirit room was a place where information was unnecessary because the frequency itself carried the connection. When the bell in the square struck its tone, every person in every house felt the same pulse. It was a biological unity that required no wires, no radios, and no laws. That unity is what disappeared. The shared resonance of the community was replaced by the isolated consumption of the modern era. The spirit room became the television room. The frequency of the earth was replaced by the frequency of the broadcast. And the transition happened slowly across wars, building codes, and generations, until we forgot that the world had ever been different. We are the children of that silence, living among the ruins of a resonant world and wondering why the stone feels so cold. But if you ever find yourself inside an old house, standing in a closet that should not exist, or in a basement corner that feels strangely out of place, stop. Do not look for ghosts. Listen for the resonance. Listen for the faint hum the stone is still trying to hold. The spirit room is still there, hidden behind drywall and brick, waiting for the bells to return. It is the silent heart of the old world, and the only part of our homes that could never truly be destroyed. They could only make us forget how to use it. The story of the spirit room is not a ghost story. It is a story of lost technology, a story of how humanity moved from biological resonance into mechanical vibration. It is the story of the 1870 reset, the moment the world grew quiet and standardization began. We still have the architecture. We still have the evidence. All we are missing is the frequency. And as long as the stone still stands, the possibility of that resonance remains. The spirit room is not merely a relic of the past. It is a blueprint for a future we have yet to reclaim. Every house built before 1870 contained a spirit room. This is what replaced it. A box, a broadcast, and a silence we were never meant to inhabit. The next time you walk through an old city, do not look at the facades. Look for the voids. Look for the spaces they tried to fill. Because inside those empty rooms lies the memory of what we once were, and the frequency of a world that has not been completely erased. The stone still remembers. And if you listen closely enough, you might discover that you do too.